to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Do I have an approval for the consent agenda? A motion to approve. A motion to approve by Councilmember Judy. I've got a second by Councilmember Tizer. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you. The first item under the mayor's report is the approval of a resolution condemning racism. Does council have any questions, concerns, or comments? Seeing no hands up, Ms. Breckville, do we have comments from the public?
Yes, we do. The first comment is from Erica Barnes Ford, 545 Slane Trace in Roswell. Dear Mayor Henry and council members, I write today as a Roswellian and on behalf of the North Fulton arm of the Fulton County Remembrance Coalition and Mac Brown Historical Marker Project Committee as a community partner in the national collaboration with the Equal Justice Initiative. We have a project that is a win for this community with your support. For those unfamiliar with the organization, the Equal Justice Initiative is part of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice and Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. During this time of truth and racial reconciliation, we have joined as diverse people from across the county to engage in honest conversations about race and ethnicity and to build consensus and connectivity among organizations. There is a renewed desire for rich and more complex political discourse, civic engagement, and socio-political movement to facilitate agreement of philosophies. Through like opinions or challenging dissent, we seek to help shape and influence public values of equity, social justice, civil liberties, transparency, political participation, civic education, and civility through encouraging dialogue. We want the continued opportunity for varied discourse across populations in a non-threatening and non-accusatory way. This is where you fit in. Our team during the last year has conducted local activities and events to engage and educate the community, and we continue to do so. The community remembrance projects are meant to memorialize documented victims of racial violence and foster healing. We want to install a historical marker near the recovery site of Mr. Mac Henry Brown, one of the 36 documented victims of lynching in Fulton County between 1877 and 1950. While the location of the lynching is unknown, his body was discovered in Roswell's Vickery Creek at the Chattahoochee River on December 23, 1936. The North Fulton arm of the Remembrance Coalition has already participated in a community soil collection process where countywide soil from recovery sites was placed into pre-labeled jars etched with the victims' names and incorporated into a permanent art installation on display at the Auburn Avenue Research Library, downtown Atlanta, last March 9th in 2019. We want to not only recognize victims of lynching by educating the community and building awareness of the history of racial terrorism, but also the connections to the present and for broader community engagement while fostering empathy and understanding that can facilitate healing action for residents of our community. We want to change the narrative and advance truth-telling on the local level. So in addition to Roswell Roots and other historical marker installations throughout the city, a project like this contributes to the visibility of and leadership that makes Roswell and Fulton County a model for the nation. We want and need your support. We especially need your approval of this site for the installation of the actual marker. We would be the first of 8 installations in Fulton County, and our proactivity would set the standard for the remaining cities. We simply need your voice. That is the request. We are not asking for financial support, as this broad network will provide the resources necessary for the installation of the marker itself. Like the Trail of Tears memorial markers in Riverside Park, this marker will be added as another point of interest in Roswell, North Fulton in the state of Georgia. It will be a modern testimonial to our actual history, a recognition of the harm done, and a meaningful step toward empathy and reconciliation. You might also wonder what benefit to Roswell this project would have. Like other progressive cities, with the desire and potential to attract newcomers and visitors, this marker and others should be spotlighted by the Georgia Historical Society and included in the GHS downloadable map app. Inclusion would increase visibility and tourism and advance the reputation of this not so little town that is ahead of its time in racial reconciliation. Finally, it has come to our attention that there is a pending resolution condemning racism. We want to acknowledge the most recent comments by Mayor Henry, recognizing the legacy and contributions of Black people of Roswell and the reiteration of the city's reaffirmation to recognize the core values of respect. Roswell has already proven itself to be progressive in its thinking. Your support demonstrates Roswell's awareness of the cultural shift and its willingness to be part of a solution. There can be no reconciliation or healing without remembering the past. Thank you in advance for your consideration. Hope Mays, 139 Chestnut Street in Roswell. My name is Hope Mays. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the resolution condemning racism, acknowledging the history of racial inequity and injustice in our country and community, and seeking systemic changes to institutional racism. I met some of you at the recent solidarity events at City Hall and appreciated the positive response to the Matt Henry Brown Historical Marker Committee tent table exhibit. As a member of the Fulton County Remembrance Coalition, who is in partnership with the National Equal Justice Initiative, I am committed to helping the community welcome resources and symbols that tell the true history of our country, the legacy of slavery and the Civil War, emancipation and Reconstruction, white supremacy and Jim Crow, voting and civil rights, and on to link current mass incarceration facts to voter suppression and expanded violence against Black Americans. One group has been engaged with the North Fulton area for over a year and has only recently been so welcomed. The network offers many resources for educating the community. The marker we want to install will be symbolic of the changes I think will come as a result of the task force. I think Roswell can construct a memorial to counter the lost cause narrative, perhaps even more quickly than dismantling the city's Confederate monuments, one of many more issues I expect will be brought before you in the near future. Thanks again for opening the dialogue regarding racism. I look forward to following and supporting your progress. I hope you support our goal as well. Reverend Dave Dunn, 11420 Crabapple Road, Roswell. Mayor Henry and City Council, as the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Metro Atlanta North Congregation, I applaud the courage of Mayor and Council in proposing the resolution condemning racism. I sincerely hope that the Council will unanimously adopt this resolution. The members of our congregation and I are ready to help you, the city, and its police department in any way necessary to ensure that the spirit of this resolution brings forth a new, just way of life for all in Roswell. Thank you again. Ross Newberry, 630 Garden Way, Roswell. I have been very impressed by the city's response to the recent racial unrest and calls for racial equality and justice. I attended this past Saturday's rally, joined the city officials present to speak the pledge to stand against racism and sign the banner. To my Caucasian eyes, the pledge looks like a very good step in the right direction, but I have never been negatively impacted by racism. After a discussion with a diverse group of Roswell residents, I would like to call on the city government to take further action by not only making a general pledge to stand against racism, but by also setting SMART goals to further drive change. SMART goals, for those unfamiliar, are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bounded. My only other concern is this: I have no knowledge of the racial or cultural makeup of the person or persons who developed the pledge I spoke on Saturday. But since the upper levels of the city's government currently appear to lack racial diversity, I would hope that any group dedicated to these ideals would be purposefully composed of as many different racial, ethnic, and cultural points of view as practically possible. Thank you to the City of Roswell for the efforts made thus far. Jeff Bell, 250 Thistlewood Lane, Roswell. Regarding the mayor's resolution to condemn racism, there is no acknowledgement of white supremacy in the resolution. Why not? If you are moved to seek systemic changes, it may be beneficial to address the source of systemic racism. What specific action steps will be made addressing systemic racism? How many citizens join Roswell City government to contribute to the efforts outlined in the resolution? Mayor, those are all the comments on that item.
Thank you, Ms. Breckville. And I would like to say that we have taken some initial steps in this, what we consider our pledge and our resolution. And these are initial steps. These are the first steps that we are taking, and we will continue. And I pledge to you that we will continue along this path until we see some positive change. And going to the one question about racial diversity, I had personally spoken about this pledge. Our Pastor Strickland with Pleasant Hill had his folks look at it. They had several changes they wanted to make. We've got our local mosque that has had input on it, as well as many of our faith-based community partners. So this is among many, many eyes. And as I said, it's the first step. It's not the final step, but we will, my plan is to move forward with this. And our goal on Saturday with the peaceful gathering was that we have things that we're going to work on to move forward. It wasn't just going to be a rally or a march. It had the purposeful intention of making changes in our communities. So, and I spoke to you all on Saturday that we will have a task force that deals with this. And I foresee this as the beginning of the conversation. So does council have any other comments, questions, concerns before I ask for a motion? Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Wilsey. Do I have a second?
Second.
Yes. Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you. And I look forward to the journey that we are all going to take with this. I don't even know how to say it. It's something that has been amongst us for my entire life, but it's also something that we're recognizing, and we are moving forward to make the changes that we need to make. So I look forward to being a part of that conversation, as I know you all do as well. The next item is the approval of a resolution calling for the state of Georgia in their FY 2021 budget to include funding for new now comp waiver recipients. Does council have any questions regarding this resolution? Do we have any public comment?
No, we do not.
Do I have a motion to approve? Motion to approve by Councilmember Hall. Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Judy. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you again. Once again, this is a resolution that will go to our state officials. And while I know that their hands are tied, as well as our hands are tied regarding the budget coming up, we certainly do hope that they will consider this as we move forward, because the burden that some of our families have in caring for children and adult children with special needs is a great one that I think that we all need to keep in the forefront of our mind. The next item is the approval of the mayor and our city administrator to sign an agreement with Fulton County for the CARES Act Municipal Reimbursement Program. Does council have any questions? Is there anyone in the public?
No comment.
No comments from the public. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve?
Motion, I'm sorry, I was looking up and motion by,
Christine?
Oh, and I'll second.
and a second by Councilmember Wilsey. You guys are trying to trick me again. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we will go on to Councilmember Tyser, Admin Finance Department.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 4 is the approval of the fiscal year 2020 year-end budget amendment. Mr. Luckett.
Thank you, Council Member.
Sorry, Miss.
Ms. Horrock.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council members. So I'll just give me a minute and I'll share my screen. Does everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're here with the end of year budget amendments for the current fiscal year 2020. And we have a few end of year amendments that we would like to bring to you for approval. So we'll start with the general fund. And the first one that we have is the recognition of additional property tax revenue in the amount of $1,800,000. And this particular revenue has come in higher than anticipated, and hence we are requesting this budget amendment. The second one is to decrease the sales tax revenue by $2 million. And as you all know, due to the impact of COVID-19, our revenues are anticipated to come in less than what we had budgeted. And hence, we are requesting this budget amendment to reduce the sales tax revenue by the $2 million. The third item that we have is the reduction of the municipal court fines revenue by $600,000. Again, here, this is due to the impact of COVID-19. The revenues are not coming in as anticipated, and hence we are requesting this budget amendment. Then we have the interest revenues. This budget amendment is being requested to recognize the additional interest revenue that has come in higher than what we had budgeted. And then we have the recognition of the additional license and permit revenue in the amount of $200,000. Again, this particular revenue stream has come in higher than we had expected. Hence, we are asking for that budget amendment to recognize the additional revenue. And then we are also requesting to reduce the transfer in from the Hotel Motel Fund. And this is the unrestricted portion that we are referring to here in the amount of $235,000. And this again is due to the impact of COVID. The revenues from the hotel motel tax haven't been as expected. Hence, we are asking for that, reducing that budget by the $235,000. And then the final item that we have in the revenue recognition category is the insurance reimbursement for RAPSTIC in the amount of $248,158. So that gives us a total revenue decrease in the general fund of $386,842 with all of these amendments. Moving on to the expenditure section, the first one we have is the Old Alabama Road emergency repair in the amount of $54,470. And staff is requesting here to increase the budget by that particular amount to recognize some emergency repairs that were conducted by the Transportation Department to fix the issue that was related to the road settlement on Old Alabama Road east of Riverside Road. So hence staff is recommending that budget amendment. The next one we have is to increase expenditures by $235,000 for the emergency repair at the old machine mill shop. So there was some damage that was caused to the retaining wall at the old mill, behind the old mill machine shop, and this was caused due to the heavy rains. And staff had to perform some emergency repairs at that location, and that had amounted to $235,000, and hence we are requesting this particular budget amendment to increase that expenditure budget by that amount to cover the cost of those repairs. The final item that we have in the expenditure category is to reduce the general fund contingency funds in the amount of $425,000. Now, this is made up of two particular items. So we have $200,000 in the general fund operating contingency that we are requesting to be reduced. And then there is also the $225,000 remaining balance from the employee compensation increase that we are saying we are reducing by. So that's the total of $425,000 there. So that is a total expenditure decrease of $135,530 in the general fund. This particular slide here provides a summary of the impact of all of these budget amendments on the fund balance. So the estimated FY20 current fund balance over reserve by policy is at a little over $1.9 million. And with the budget amendments in the revenues, so that decreases it by, the revenues decreased by $386,842, leaving us with an estimated available funding of a little over 1.5. And with a reduction in expenditures of $135,530, we have an estimated remaining fund balance over reserve by policy of $1.66 million. And I'd like to mention here that this $1.66 million that you see here also includes the reserve that we have set aside for the uncertainties that may arise out of COVID-19. And that is the $1,596,325 that you had seen during the FY 2021 budget process that was approved by Mayor and Council. So essentially, the fund balance that we would have remaining over reserve by policy in the general fund would be $65,825. Moving on to the capital projects fund. So here again, the first item that we have in the revenues is to reduce the hotel motel transfer in and the project expense by $20,000. Again, this is due to COVID-19, since our revenues have from the hotel motel tax haven't been as expected. We are requesting Mayor and Council to approve this budget amendment to reduce the transfer in by the $20,000 and also the project expense for the River Parks Master Plan by that $20,000. And what we are proposing instead is to use those $20,000 from the impact fee fund for another project that has already been completed. And then staff is also requesting recognition of revenue from the enterprise vehicle buyback program that is in the amount of $523,001. And then we have the appropriation of additional hotel motel trail funds in the amount of $17,941. So under the old hotel motel tax rates, a portion of the revenues was earmarked for trails within the historic district, but that was stopped. So under the current hotel motel tax rate, we no longer allocate funds based on that methodology towards trails. So this is the money that is remaining from that old allocation method, and we are requesting Mayor and Council to appropriate those funds towards the hotel motel trail so it can be spent down. So that is a total revenue increase in the capital projects fund of $520,942 with those particular amendments. And then in the expenditure section, you see the other portion of the reduction of the hotel motel transfer in and project expense that you saw above in the revenue category in the amount of $20,000. And then you also see the appropriation of the additional hotel motel trail funds of the $17,941 that I referred to earlier on this slide. So that reduces the expenses by a little over $2,000 in the capital projects fund. This slide here provides a summary of the impact of these adjustments on the capital projects fund balance. So here we have the beginning fund balance is estimated, the current fund balance is estimated at a little over $61,000. We have the additional revenue recognition of $520,942. which would give us an estimated available funding of a little over $582,000. And with the reduction in expenses of a little over $2,000, we would be left with an estimated fund balance of $584,708 in this particular fund. And then moving on to the Hotel Motel Fund, the first item that we have here is the reduction of the Hotel Motel tax revenue by $550,000. Again, this is due to the impact of COVID that we are seeing a drop in our revenues, and hence we are requesting Mayor and Council to approve the reduction of that revenue budget by this particular amount. And then in the expenditure category for this particular fund, we have the reduction of the allocation to CVB, which is our Roswell Convention and Visitors Bureau, by $200,000. Again, this is due to the impact of COVID-19, where our revenues are not coming in as expected, and hence we are requesting for the reduction of that allocation to CVB by $200,000. And then we are also requesting a reduction of the transfer out to the general fund, and this is the unrestricted portion, the $235,000, which I had referred to earlier in the general fund section. So this is that amount, this is the transfer out amount that you see here in the Hotel Motel Fund. And then you see again the $20,000, which is the transfer out to the Capital Projects Fund, which you saw on an earlier slide. So you're seeing the other half of that right here. And then the appropriation of the Hotel Motel Trail Funds. This is again the transfer out amount that you're seeing, the $17,941. So with that, that would be a total expenditure reduction in the Hotel Motel Fund of $437,059. With those particular adjustments, the impact on the Hotel Motel Fund is shown here on this slide. So we have an estimated current fund balance of $161,370. The revenue recognition, so we are reducing the revenue by the $550,000, which would give us an estimated available funding, which is a negative amount of $388,630. But with the expenditure reduction of $437,059, we would be left with a remaining fund balance in the Hotel Motel Fund of $48,429. And then we have the Leita Thompson Fund. We have just one item here, and that is to appropriate the fund balance for emergency repairs that were conducted at the park here. In the amount of $49,266, and this was basically for the damage that was caused to an apartment, and the staff had to conduct some emergency repairs to fix the roof of that particular apartment, and that is the amount of $49,266 that we are requesting. So with that particular adjustment, the fund balance that would be remaining in this particular fund would be $80,600. This slide here gives you a summary of the impact of all of these budget amendments on all the four funds here. So you will notice that in the general fund, it is a net revenue decrease, a net expense of $251,312. In the Capital Projects Fund, it would be a net revenue of $523,001. In the Hotel Motel Fund, it would be a decrease, a net expense of $112,941. And similarly, in the Leita Thompson Fund, you would see a net expense of $49,266. So citywide, you would see a net revenue of $109,482 with all these end-of-year budget amendments. That is all I have. If there are any questions, we would be happy to answer them.
Does council have any questions? Seeing no hands up, do we have any comments from the public?
No, we do not.
No comments from the public. I'll bring it back to council. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Tizer. Do I have a second? A second by Councilmember Judy and Councilmember Wilsey. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harpreet.
Great job. And next we'll go on to Recreation and Parks Department, Councilmember Judy.
All right, item number 5, approval to accept the United States Tennis Association, USTA, facility and facility recovery grants and approval of a budget amendment 222-620-06-22-2020 and the amount of $32,141.25. I believe Mr. Malone's going to be presenting this tonight.
Good evening. Thank you. Yes, this item is the consideration for those 2 USTA facility grants. One was regarding the Hembry Park resurfacing of their tennis courts. There's 4 tennis courts out there. The second was a facility recovery grant due to COVID. These grants are matching funds or reimbursement funds that are coming in. That Hembry Park tennis court resurfacing was capital improvement project we had in fiscal year 20.
Does council have any questions? Are there any comments, questions from the public?
No, there are not.
No comments from the public. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve item number 5.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Judy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is Community Development Department, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 6 of today's agenda, approval of a resolution to adopt the annual update of the Short-Term Work Program, STWP, on Capital Improvement Element, CIE, covering the 5 years period 2020-2025.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. If you give me a minute, I will share my screen. So this is the adoption of the short-term work program and the capital improvement element. This was transmitted by the council back in May. The Department of Community Affairs and the Atlanta Regional Commission have both reviewed and approved the short-term work program and capital improvement element, and staff recommends approval of the adoption of both items. Do you have any questions?
Does council have any questions? Do we have any comments from the public?
No, we do not.
No comments from the public. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. Motion to approve item number 6 of today's agenda.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Thank you. Back to you, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 7, approval of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to delete section 10.1.6.b, building constructed prior to 1959, and amend section 10.1.6.6.c, building constructed since 1959. This is the first reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Article 10, Section 10.1.6, downtown required parking. Now, therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend Section 10.1.6, downtown required parking, of the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this will be the first reading.
Council have any questions, comments, concerns? Do we have any comments from the public?
No, we do not.
No comments from the public. Do we have additional comments, or do I have a motion? Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So this one is something where even actually within the last couple of days, I have checked in with, some different business owners that have been impacted by the parking challenges we have, et cetera. And there definitely is continued interest in really correcting this issue. And really, as a reminder, what brought about this issue was I believe it was 2009, sometime between 2009 and 2014. I forget the exact date. Council had basically passed a law that said if the building was constructed prior to 1959, no parking is required. And we've certainly been witnessing the unintended consequences of that. What we've seen and what we look at from our code is the fact that restaurants use a greater amount of parking than other uses. And so what we've seen is an unnatural demand where we've seen so many different retail and other non-restaurant type uses in prior to 1959 buildings being converted to restaurants, only adding a further strain within our downtown. So it adds to more parking strain. It also impacts the diversity of businesses within our downtown. What I would like to discuss and suggest is regarding the feedback from the, if you listen to the audio from the Planning Commission, there was certainly discussion of this, this rule that was passed created an issue, created unintended consequences, but there was also a lot of questions and uncertainty around having a parking fund. And that is something where I support it with the parking fund. That is something that Alpharetta does do to support their ability and their funds to create parking solutions. Just as the city has rented a number of different lots, we have unanimously supported the DDA looking for really coming up with parking solutions and presenting back to council. And I'd suggest we consider not having the parking fund piece in what passes tonight. And that's something that with guidance from the DDA and the public, we can certainly always, add in or incorporate at a future time. But I think the key is every building, of course, and every use should be grandfathered in as they currently are. But if they want to switch to a use that requires more parking and uses more parking, then there really should be the requirement to come up with that parking if they want to make that switch.
Ms. Dybel, I apologize for skipping over you. I know that you've got a presentation on all of these text amendments. So do you want to present this first one now and give us the background and history of the wording on this?
Yes, I can do that. So this is the text amendment as stated to delete section 10.1.6. So what we're going to go into here is, let's try it this way instead. Okay, so this will delete the following wording from the Unified Development Code. The reuse of any building built prior to 1959 located within the historic overlay district is exempt from meeting the vehicle or motorcycle parking requirements below. The bicycle parking requirements of section 10.1.3b will apply. So the history related to this, the former ordinance language stated the reuse of any structure built prior to 1959, which is zone C1, Central Commercial District, and located within the historic district of Roswell is exempt from off-street parking requirements. So this happened around 2009, if I'm correct on that. So at that time, the C1 zoning was located on Canton Street, Atlanta Street, Alpharetta Street, and a few other properties in the district, but not the entire district. So when the UDC was adopted in 2014, the C1 zoning in the area of Canton Street changed to DS downtown shopfront. The C1 zoning in other locations changed to different classifications. We have some DX, it changed to some DH. So, but the area that this is mostly focused on is the DS area on Canton Street. But the wording in the Unified Development Code included the entire district. So letter B will replace this language. The change of use of any building built prior to 1959 located within the historic district is required to meet the parking standards that are indicated in letter C below or pay into a parking fund as established by mayor and council by resolution. So the Planning Commission did have questions, as Councilmember Palermo just stated. They said, how is the fund being handled? What is the cost? What would be the time frame on a deck? And what businesses would pay into the fund? And would they ever see one built? We also have the second portion of this, which would be the mayor and council hereby amend section 10.16 downtown required parking letter C. Change the title to parking requirements for downtown. This is what we have currently in the code. As you can see, what we'd be changing letter B, and then we'd be changing the title to letter C, as I just read. Planning Commission did recommend denial. That is all staff has for this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Steibel. One of the questions I've got is, we have just asked our Downtown Development Authority to look at parking in this area. And to me, it would seem like a natural fit to have them look at the questions revolving around a parking fund. And I would think that that would be, like I said, a natural fit. And what does that look like? So is there any, does anyone support putting this forward and asking the DDA to look at the parking fund and not include the fund in this ordinance change? Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
I just want to say I certainly support that. I think this is a great opportunity to really fix an issue and prevent kind of really just a further strain and lack of diversity of businesses within our downtown, while also while adding that protection in, empowering the DDA for just another thing to have them look at and potentially another tool in the toolbox.
Councilmember Hall.
Yes, I think it's a great idea to have the DDA tackle the parking fund piece of this, as that's part of their scope that we've charged them for, that they're charged with.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think it's important to remember the intention of this rule when it was written, exempting buildings that were constructed before 1959, and that was to encourage adaptive reuse and to encourage businesses to use the historic buildings that were there. So I think we need to be careful of any change in the code that would prevent that or make that more difficult. I fully support having DDA look into a parking fund or other parking options, and they can look into this aspect as well. But I just don't think we're ready or at a good point to make any changes to the code at this time, because I certainly do not want to discourage, restaurants and retail businesses from coming in and using existing buildings in the historic district.
Councilmember Tyser.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually support the DDA looking at this and all the parking issues. I think it's a very good use of their process and structure. I'll not be supportive of this amendment tonight, primarily because I'm concerned about the unintended consequences. And while we can argue back and forth about them, the prediction that I will make is that if we don't have some solution to parking and we pass this change, we will have empty storefronts. And that's my concern in today's environment. I would very much prefer having parking solution in place and then make this change and then use whatever methodology to pay into a parking fund that we choose to make. And so, I fully understand that those supportive of this think differently, but again, it's my opinion that this will be what the consequences will be, at least in the short to mid-term, which is the same amount of time I think it would take DDA to think thoroughly through this and make a very thorough and in-depth recommendation. Thank you.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. And I definitely appreciate the cordial dialogue, and I think a lot of important viewpoints being raised, and I definitely want to address a few of them. So without a doubt, the purpose of why this was passed in 2009 is to give the opportunity for the adaptive reuses. And And so that's something that certainly we've seen and something we certainly have. I want to make it very clear, if passed tonight, which I certainly hope this passes the first reading. This is not the second and final reading, but I certainly hope this passes the first reading, because a couple different things I just want to clarify. Number one is every single place is grandfathered in. So meaning anything that you have downtown, if it's a restaurant, it is already grandfathered in to be able to continue being a restaurant, of course. Anything that is retail, anything is grandfathered in. What this is bringing up is a way that I feel the system's been somewhat gamed, which is the fact that you have a restaurant that requires higher parking than another use. And then what we've seen an unnatural demand there, which is why we've seen so many places that were not restaurants all turning into them, because there's that push for not needing to meet the parking requirement. That's again, I feel has been a negative consequence for two reasons. One, a negative consequence because if you're just adding that many more businesses that require that much more parking, that is creating further strain and really highlighting an issue that we all clearly agree on. And number two, the fact that really an important part of having a vibrant downtown is having diversity of businesses. And again, what we've been witnessing is so many places all turning into restaurants. So my concern with slowing this down and not supporting this is every single time a place changes from being retail or art or anything that's not the highest use, which is the restaurant. Anytime it turns into being that higher higher parking requirement restaurant, then there's no turning back. Because at the end of the day, I think we all agree every place should be grandfathered in. So therefore, if something turns into a restaurant and then we pass this a few months later, that's too late. There's no opportunity there, and I don't feel anyone in our community wants to see our downtown be nothing but restaurants. I think it is important to have diversity of businesses, and I do believe in the free market. Diversity of businesses is natural. The challenge is we've really impacted the free market by having just specific buildings that don't have a parking requirement. Any new building in the historic district does have the parking requirement, and it's an important one, and it's one that we're certainly going to witness as we have a number of different developments coming forward. But this is the opportunity to give a protection right now. And as the DDA works on the parking fund and all their other solutions, I'm certainly open to improving this any way we can. But I do feel it's important to not delay, or else just more damage will be done.
Councilmember Judy.
I too am worried about this having unintended consequences. Looking at the economy right now, coming out of this post-COVID world, you're looking at retail and storefronts that are shopping, really struggling to stay open, and those are national chains. So if we're not going to be able to, we're going to make it harder for people to come spend money and put businesses in our downtown area at this point in time without a solution, which would be a parking fund that had a true solution for these folks to pay into, I think is kind of is putting the cart before the horse. So I think until we have that true solution that would actually create parking spaces for these folks in the parking fund, then I can't support this. But again, if we go and we make it harder to bring businesses to downtown Roswell into buildings that could be empty for whatever reason, then I think that's something we need to be very careful of.
Councilmember Palermo.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor Henry. So again, I think all important concerns and points. I am concerned that perhaps we're all somewhat talking past each other, and I just want to make sure we fully understand what the impact from this is. So what this is doing is it is not in any way impacting the lower parking use businesses. So by no means is it making it tougher for a store, retail, art, anything anything basically that's not a restaurant. So it's not by any means in any way discouraging business. In fact, I'd argue it's actually doing the opposite. The reason I described that unnatural demand that was created is basically what we found is the restaurants could and would pay a much higher rent than anything else could in order to pay for that opportunity to not have to come up with a parking requirement. And we've seen, if anything, we've seen a lot of businesses needing perhaps leave our historic downtown because of the rent increases and other reasons, not anything to do with it. I'd actually argue that by doing this, it's obviously great for landlords. They can have a building that has no parking and still move from being a lower revenue generating retail or store, anything that's not a restaurant, to moving to a restaurant. So I totally get it from that perspective. But again, what that ends up doing is that's actually making it even tougher on the stores that are trying to survive in our downtown. It's also making it tougher for our restaurants with the increased and unrealistic just amount of just the demand, the rent, all those different aspects. And again, I think residents also don't want it to be 100% restaurants. And again, if we don't pass this, there's no change in that. We're going to continue to see, just as when actually we brought this forward, and council members Zapata and I 2 years ago were the two council members that were supporting this. Since then, we've seen multiple places that were retail and other stores needing to leave for restaurants to come in. Again, there's no reversing that. And again, that's why this was raised and requested by a lot of our business community, as well as supported by a lot of residents when getting into the details.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a question for staff, just to put in perspective. How many parking spots are required for restaurant versus for, let's say, an art gallery? So we can put in perspective the needs of parking spaces for those two different users between a restaurant and a art gallery, let's say, or any other retail shop.
Okay, so currently in the code, in the historic district, a restaurant is required, or anything other than a restaurant is required of 1 parking space per 500 square feet. And for a restaurant, it's 1 vehicle parking space per 300 square feet. So that's the difference. So let's say you have a 1,000 square foot space for a an art gallery, which is not a restaurant. You would be required 2 spaces. If you had a restaurant, you'd be required 3.3. So we probably, normally if it's below 3.5, we would go down to 3. If it's 3.5 or above, it would be 4 spaces. Does that help?
Thank you, Ms. Stagel. Additional questions from council? Councilmember Judy.
Again, Councilman Palermo, I understand what you're saying. What I'm trying to say is, in a down economy where many businesses, such as small business, such as art galleries, clothing shops, et cetera, are trying to make rent places, whereas we're trying to make sure that's happening to the best of our ability to make sure we don't have empty storefronts up and down the street. Maybe now's not the time to change that dynamic. I understand, until we have a method for them to pay into a parking fund that then would increase the ability to have parking. Right now, I'm just worried that, you know, I've spoken to many people that own buildings up and down the street, and they're not supportive of this because, you know, you're strapping an owner of a building with basically almost all the buildings on that street are pre-1959. So, you know, this isn't arbitrary, I don't feel. I feel like we might be putting a problem in place that isn't there at this point in a downturn in the economy, and that's my worry.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry, and Councilman Judy. I definitely think your heart is in the right place and appreciate this this dialogue. So this is something that is actually going to protect and help that small business that's struggling. Because instead of having a landlord say, you know what, a restaurant I can get in here that pays a higher rent because I don't have to have that extra parking that they have and all that. So this is actually going to help all the businesses that are currently there. What it's not going to do is it's going to make it so that if it's currently an art gallery, a retail store, anything that's not a restaurant, if a landlord decides that they want to evict a non-resident restaurant and bring in a restaurant, then what it's saying is basically with Ms. Dybel's example, if it was 1,000 square feet, they would have been required to have 2 parking spots. And then now as a restaurant, they'd be required to have 3 parking spots. What this is doing is just saying that if the landlord wants to make that change and turn it into a restaurant, they have to come up with that 1 parking spot. And the problem is, since 2009, we've not been doing that. And that's why we've seen our parking issue continue to be strained. And we've seen more and more non-restaurants turn into restaurants. So again, this does not affect any existing business. It only affects new ones, and only if they want to change from a non-restaurant use to a restaurant use.
Councilmember Judy.
You're mute, Matt.
You're muted.
Never mind. Sorry. Or from a restaurant to the other way as well. But it'll be a lesser parking situation. I understand what you're saying, but it goes both ways.
Well, no, except if a restaurant.
Excuse me, Councilmember Palermo, you are not recognized. Councilmember Judy, are you finished? Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. So this would only be when there's an incremental parking increase. So it would not affect from non-restaurant changing to non-restaurant. It would not affect a restaurant changing to a restaurant. It would not affect a restaurant changing to a non-restaurant. The only thing this would impact is a non-restaurant changing to a restaurant. There's an incremental parking amount of parking used. And this will be just saying they need to come up with that parking, with Ms. Dybel's example of coming up with one spot.
Additional comments? Yes, Councilmember Hall, or I'm sorry, Wilsey.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand what you're saying, Mike. I think unless we have a parking solution to offer to that business who might be changing the use, we're just creating a barrier to entry. And the unintended consequences, I don't think are a wise move to make right now until we have a solution to offer. And I think that's something we can continue to work on, and have tasked DDA to do so. So we might ask them to look at this issue as well.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a clarification from Ms. Dybel. Let's say that I have the same use. I'm going to turn an art gallery into a CBD store. And that CBD store probably requires roughly 4 parking places. Since we're talking about mostly just South Canton Street here, where are those parking places today? And where would the new owner come up with them if they don't exist today?
Okay, so today, a lot of places on Canton Street in that area share parking, and they share parking up and down the street. There's a lot of parking that's gone on Founders Hall, different restaurants. As long as it's within 500 feet, we've always used 500 feet. We've allowed for shared parking, and that has gone on for years in the historic districts. So let's say the CBD store. So the art gallery had, the art gallery and the CBD store both fall under retail type uses. So they are both, would both require 500, if you have 1,000 square feet, both of them would only require two spaces each one. So let's say the art gallery had no spaces, and the CBD store wanted to come in. If they can't provide us the spaces on site, they would have to provide us the documentation that showed a shared parking agreement where they received the spaces from another business to show that they had the 2 spaces that they could cover.
Thank you, Ms. Duggal. That's really the point I'm trying to make, is that the problem is different and more detailed than what this is taking care of. And that's why I'm having a hard time making a partial change. Because what I think you just said is, if as the art gallery, I had a shared parking agreement, but I want to put in a CBD store and I can't find one, a shared parking agreement for whatever reason, then I'm going to have an empty building. So we have more than just this particular issue to solve. And my concern is when you pull this block out of the bottom of the pile, the other ones come tumbling down. So I don't really need to spend a whole lot more time discussing this one. I understand kind of everybody's point. I'm not long-term against the concept, but we're just not ready.
Councilmember Palermo.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Henry. So Ms. Deb, I just want to walk through that same example, because what we've discussed and what the intention here is, using that same exact example, if we have an art gallery that's required to have 2 spots, and that art gallery is then going to change into a CBD store, which you're saying is the same use, so requires 2 spots, we would just look at it and see 2 minus 2 equals 0. In which case they're not required to come up with any additional parking. Where the only situation where there would be a requirement to come with extra parking is if we have a pre-1959, a pre-1959 building that's going from something to a restaurant, which requires more. That's the only time there would ever be an impact, not from switching from a use, from one use that requires 2 spots to a different use that requires 2 spots.
May I answer that?
Ms. Duggal, yes.
Okay, thank you. So you are correct in that. However, they still have to provide us the shared parking agreement to show that they'd have spaces. So if the art gallery had a shared agreement to show that they have the 2 spaces, then most likely CBD store would probably talk to the same owner who had the agreement with the art gallery and use those 2 spaces from there. So it would be a 0 to 0, but they have to provide us with the shared agreement. Does that make sense?
Well, so then I guess help me understand. So, and we're talking about a building built prior to 1959, right?
That's correct. So if it's, well, then it would be exempt. So if it was built prior to 1959, it would be exempt from having to require them. Yes, you are correct. So if it was after 1959, then they would have to show us the shared agreement.
Right, but we're only talking about built before 1959. So yeah, post 1959, nothing's being discussed or changed, anything like that. This is just the fact that prior to 1959, no building is required to have shared parking or any parking. So we're purely just talking about before 1959. And the only impact is if they want to change from being a non-restaurant, which requires less parking, to becoming a restaurant, which requires more. So I just want to make sure we're being focused on what's being discussed here.
That is the only section, correct.
Councilmember Kaiser.
I think that kind of was my point. There actually is no parking to start with, and making people go find parking with shared agreements. I just think we haven't found the right solution yet. So again, that's all I'll say on the matter. Thank you.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, following to my original question, I got a great answer. What is the average square footage of a, let's say, a retail shop, independent retail shop, locally owned versus a restaurant? Normally, what is the average square footage of a restaurant versus independent shop?
So the Can Street would probably be very similar. Probably get about the same for any retail and for restaurants. They're all, those buildings, if you look at them, they're all built very similar, pretty close to similar size and everything else. So they all should be about the same.
And Councilmember Zapata, just to add on to that, we don't necessarily have records in front of us to tell you what various buildings and storefronts that are up and down the Canton Street area's exact square footages are, to be able to give that to you right now.
Additional questions, comments from council? Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. Motion. I mean, I heard that there's not much support for the parking fund, which is fine with me, and I would like to see more the DDA look into parking fund eventually if it's needed and appropriate. So I would like to make a motion to approve not item number 7, but without the paragraph that talk about the parking fund.
We've got a motion by Councilmember Zapata. Staff, do you have any questions about that motion?
No, thank you.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it's Councilmember Hall, Zapata, and Palermo. All those opposed. We've got Councilmember Judy, Councilmember Wilsey, and Councilmember Tyser. I'll break that tie in favor of the motion. The next item, please.
Sorry, item number 8, approval of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Article 4, Section 4.3, Building Type Standards. This is the first reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Section 4.3, Building Type Standards. Now therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend Section 4.3, Building Type Standards of the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this will be the first reading.
Council, have any questions of Mr. Davidson before we go to Ms. Dybel? Ms. Dybel.
Yes, so this text amendment is to remove the walk-up flat and the stack flat building types from the CX, the commercial mixed use, and the CC commercial corridor zone properties located within the Holcomb Bridge Road, Georgia 400, Georgia 140 character area, and the Georgia 400 Holcomb Bridge no character area. So this is the current chart in our Unified Development Code. You can see the walk-up flat and stack flat building types are currently allowed as building types in the RX, residential mixed use, CX, commercial mixed use, CC, commercial corridor, and CH, commercial heavy zoning classifications in the corridor and node districts. This is the section to show you a little bit of an example. This is the Parkway Village area of the city. And at this point in time, these building types are not, as stated, if you looked at the screen before, it's not, the building types are not required or allowed in the Parkway Village zoning classification. So in the ordinance prior to the UC, a little history, condos and townhomes were permitted uses in Parkway Village overlay at a density of 6 units per acre. Apartments were not allowed in the Parkway Village overlay. Currently in the PV district, multifamily is listed as a conditional use. However, it must be part of a mixed use building because the stack flat and walk-up flat building types are not allowed. Planning Commission did recommend denial of this application. Do you have any questions for staff?
Does council have any questions? Do we have any questions, comments from the public?
Yes, we do. Scott Long, 1055 Martin Ridge Road in Roswell. Dear Mayor and Council, thank you for getting together during this challenging time to consider these important UDC text amendments. All have merit, but I would like to advocate in particular for item number 8, approval of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code to Article 4, Section 4.3, Building Type Standards, and ask you to approve it. This amendment aligns the multifamily building type rules between 92 Crossville and 140 Holcomb Bridge Road which has had a discrepancy since the inception of the UDC in 2014. One additional request I would make for this item is that we include the CH zoning category along with the others. The amendment only mentions CC and CX zoning categories, which should also include CH in order to be complete. CH must be included because while it is correct that no sites are currently zoned CH on Holcomb Bridge, CH is allowed for Georgia 400 Holcomb Bridge Road node and Holcomb Bridge Road State Route 140 character area. So CH has to be included. Otherwise, you can just rezone to CH to get past the rule. With regards to the main issue, note that PV is the zoning category on most of 92 Crossville, which is a 6-lane state highway with strip malls, aging housing stock, and some new housing. And note that CX, CC, and CH is the zoning category on much of 140 Holcomb Bridge Road, which is a 4- and 6-lane state highway with strip malls, aging house stock, and some new housing. Despite the nearly exact match between CX and PV with regards to allowed uses, the PV zoning district forbids the walk-up flat and stacked flat building types, while the CX, CC, and CH categories permit these types. As you know, walk-up flat and stacked flat are the building types used for standalone apartment buildings, with stacked flat being the building type for standalone and garden apartments. All this translates to the fact that standalone garden apartments are prohibited along 92 Crossville if they are allowed on 140 Holcomb Bridge. On 92, apartments must be vertically integrated above commercial in the mixed-use building type. On 140, they can be standalone, even in unwalkable areas. To place it in context, the project approved at the East Roswell target would not even be allowed on Crossville 92. This means that an investor that wants to propose a project on our east-west corridor is not equipped to build a contemporary mixed-use development and only has capabilities for garden apartments has no option but to propose their project on 140 Holcomb Bridge because it is not even allowed on 92 Crossville. I believe we should remedy this excessive pressure put in one area by the UDC building type rules and equalize these rules between 92 Crossville and 140 Holcomb Bridge. Here are 2 ways I can think of to accomplish balance. By removing walk-up flat and stacked flat from the allowed building types in CX, CC, and CH categories, just as they have already been removed from PV, or by adding walk-up flat and stacked flat to the allowed building types in the PV category. The amendment takes the first option and correctly addresses the issue. Note that this change would not take away multifamily. It would simply make the multifamily rules in the Holcomb 140 node districts match those in Crossville 92. Multifamily apartments will continue to be fully allowed as a conditional use in the mixed-use building type in all these districts, PV, CX, CC, CH, as it already is today. The change would just mean that the existing Alpharetta-style mixed-use building requirements for multifamily on 92 Crossville would also apply along 140 Holcomb Bridge Road.
Thank you, Ms. Brackbill. Council, have any questions, comments, concerns? Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So I of course strongly support really bringing the protections that we have to the west side, to the east side. We've seen multiple developments that have been impacted by this, and I absolutely want to see us really fixing this and make sure that we're creating the opportunity for destinations. Also, I strongly support adding CH to this so that we can make sure to really be adding protections for the east side as well.
Additional comments from council? Seeing no further hands up or comments, do I have a motion? Oh, Councilmember Wilson.
Yeah, I do have a concern and just needing to really look at this building type and see where it might be a useful type of residential building. I hear a lot of people say they are just tired of townhomes and they don't want to see any more townhomes anymore. You know, I think this type of building gives us another option, one floor living for folks. It's also something that would be useful on some of the smaller lots that are available. And there are some very nice buildings of this type in Alpharetta and in Milton that have units that are selling for, you know, $600,000, $800,000. So I just don't want to, you know, throw away this housing option when it could fill a very important need for the area. You know, as far as changing it from the east side and the west side, I completely understand the thought process behind that. And it's not something that I disagree with. I definitely think that the east side deserves a special character. And that's something that I think we can look at as we move forward with a comprehensive plan. Then just some things to think about. I don't know if you've really looked at what this type of building you know, looks like and what some of the potential could be. I know there's concern about garden apartments, but I think that could be fixed by looking at some other things like floor area ratio and things like that, so that we could alleviate some of those concerns, especially being used as a building type within a mixed use project. I think it could serve a very important need.
Additional comments from council? Councilmember Judy.
Just for an example, Ms. Dybel, is the Catherine up Alpharetta Highway, would that be stack flats that we'd be banning here?
Which one is the Catherine?
The one where Sports Life used to be up there, the Fuqua project?
Okay, so the Fuqua project is the stack flat building type.
Thank you.
Additional, yes, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think that this initiative is very important to bring the standards of East and West, Highway 92 and 141 to the same standards. No need to have different standards here between the East and the West, and that bring up the standards for the East side. So I'm a very supportive of this initiative, and I also supportive of adding on my motion CH zoning as well. So I think that this will be very important to standardize the East and the West in terms of building type.
Is that a motion, Councilmember Zapata?
I can make a motion now, Mayor. Motion to approve item number 8 of today's agenda, adding CH zoning category.
We've got a motion by Councilmember Zapata. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it is Zapata, Palermo, Hall, and Wilsey. All those opposed? Councilmember Judy and Councilmember Tizer. The motion carries. Back to you, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So now item number 9, approval of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to sections 4.2, 5.2, 6.2 district components to restrict multifamily units from the first floor of mixed-use developments. This is the first reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Articles 4, 5, and 6 regarding restriction of multifamily units from the first floor. Now, therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend Articles 4, 5, and 6 of the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this would be the first reading.
Ms. Dybel.
Hold on a second. Okay, so this text amendment is to remove, to have no multifamily units be located on the first floor of a mixed-use building. So it's to allow only commercial and office uses on the bottom level of this. The intent is to have a vertical mix of uses within a building. The Planning Commission questioned this during the meeting on May 5th, and they wanted to indicate in Article 2 under the building types, we felt that it was already here, so why were they adding it to another section? So what I want to show you is in section 2.2.1, it states this under letter J for mixed use building. A multi-story building type that is designed to accommodate ground floor retail, office or commercial uses with upper story residential or office uses, not intended for ground floor residential. Planning Commission recommended denial of this text amendment. Staff suggestion in that section in Article 2 to change the last sentence to say no residential uses are allowed on the ground floor. Instead of saying not intended for ground floor residential, to say no residential uses on the ground floor. That might make it more clear. Do you have any questions for staff?
Thank you, Ms. Steibel. And I do want to verify with Mr. Davidson that not intended for ground floor residential uses does not mean that it's not allowed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So by changing the wording, it would solve that problem. And I certainly could support that. So, Council, do you have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So I'm definitely supportive of however staff, both Ms. Dybel and our planning and zoning office, as well as Mr. Davidson in our legal office, feels that we can make sure that it's clear and it's enforceable. Because when listening to the Planning Commission discussion, it was kind of funny to bring it up. This is already in there. They wanted to go ahead and deny it. And I wish it was that simple. And obviously we're gonna get into another item later on where it's in there. It says with the intention. But at the end of the day, we've seen recently with apartment buildings that have been approved as mixed-use buildings that still did have residential on the first floor. So our code clearly says this is what's intended, but we need to actually bring this text amendment forward to actually make it so that it's the reality instead of just the intention.
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick question. With or without this change, can someone build a building where that first floor is parking?
Ms. Dybel?
We're not sure. We've never seen anybody build one for the first floor as parking. That's a good question.
So, Mayor Henry?
Yes, I see your hand. I was letting Ms. Steibel finish. Councilmember Palermo.
I thought we saw, we've seen proposals for them. I remember there was a proposal, but then that proposal never came to council because they withdrew prior to the hearing. But I believe we have seen one for it.
Councilmember Palermo, do you remember what project that was?
Yeah, it was, I believe it was Hill Street.
Thank you. Councilmember Tizer?
Thanks. I think, although you can argue whether it's the first floor or not, I think the back part of Vickers is parking on the first floor. The purpose of my question, and I'll put together more on my concerns for the second reading, is the cumulative effect of what we've put in our UDC, and my concern about what a building will look like if we don't change a couple of other things related to parking and other requirements. I'm a little bit concerned about what we develop, and so I'll probably not be supportive today, but we'll come back with some other comments at a later date.
Thank you, Councilmember Tizer. Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And this is a question for Ms. Steibel. Do we make a distinction, and are we making a distinction in this conversation between a mixed-use building and a mixed-use project? A project that might incorporate several buildings where, and I'll just let you answer that, but then I'll give an example.
So this text amendment where we made the change would be for a mixed-use building, so building type. So a mixed-use development might have a variety of different buildings in it. It could have a general building. It might have a mixed-use building, depending on the zoning classification. And if a stacked flat building is still allowed, that could be within a mixed-use building, mixed-use development. So you can have a variety of different building types within a development. But for this text amendment, it's for the mixed-use building type.
It's for the building type itself. Okay, all right, that's great. But something to think about if we're looking at a mixed-use development, you can have a mix of buildings where you might have several buildings with retail on the bottom and commercial office on the next 2, 3, 4 floors, balanced out by a couple of buildings that were strictly residential, and still end up with a very high percentage of commercial to residential.
Well, and I think Councilmember will see what this is dealing with is vertical mixed use, not horizontal mixed use. And what you're referring to in a development would be horizontal mixed use, and this is vertical mixed use. Councilmember Judy.
No, I think that's kind of my concern too, is if you could build a development that's got buildings that are separate uses and be at 50% commercial through the whole development, and it could be a great design, but we're making within that design them make the design something that might not work. So if we're looking at percentage later on in this conversation of mixed use versus non-mixed use, I think that this is kind of repetitive, and it might make the project worse in some cases because of the way it's built. And I'm not an architect, so I don't know what that looks like, but I do think if we're looking at percentages here in the upcoming conversation, that should take care of what this is designed to do, which is knocking out buildings that are strictly residential. And so maybe there's a delineation between a project and a single building.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So just to clarify too, though, regarding the percentages, that's just for CX, commercial zone properties, whereas in this right here is for anywhere that's going to use a mixed use building. And with it, again, our code already says that a mixed use building is not intended for residential on the first floor. And we have seen Alpharetta doesn't have identical language to this, but they do have something incorporated in touching this as well that we have seen as working well, really creating more opportunity for actual mixed use and walkability.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a question for clarification. Councilmember Palermo, you might have this answer, or Ms. Steibel. Is that tied to a specific lot size or acreage for a mixed-use building?
Ms. Steibel.
No, a mixed-use building is not tied to a specific size. So whatever property that might come in could be an acre, or it could be a couple acres, or it might be less than an acre. We have a variety of sizes of properties throughout the city, and a mixed-use building type is allowed in a variety of different zoning classifications.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So I will just keep it short. I think that this amendment will add to the existing language, but make it improve and clarify the existing language. No more than that. It's just to improve and clarify what we already have there, which is kind of ambiguous and not very clear for staff to interpret. So I think that all it does is to improve and clarify the existing language.
Additional comments from council? Did we have any public comment?
No, we do not.
There are no comments from the public. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. Motion to approve item number 9 of today's agenda with the language proposed by staff to improve and clarify the existing language.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it is Hall, Palermo, and Zapata. All those opposed, please raise your hands. And that is Judy, Tizer, and Wilsey. I'll break the tie in favor of the motion. Back to you, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So item number 10, approval of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Article 4, Section 4.2, District Components, Section 4.2.1, applicability regarding commercial mixed use, CX requirements. This is the first reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying section 4.2 district components. Now therefore, the mayor and council of the city of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend section 4.2 district components of the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference. If approved, this is the first reading.
Ms. Stagel.
So this text amendment is to Article 4, Section 4.2, CX, the commercial mixed use requirements. So when this text amendment was initiated, it said the CX district shall require over 50% of square footage of a development to be commercial/retail. So we're going to give some history on this one here. So to begin with, in the fall of 2018 into the early portion of 2019, staff went through several iterations of an ordinance to show percentages for mixed-use districts. We did a lot of research of other jurisdictions, and then we presented all that to the ComDev and Transportation Committee. When this was initiated by council, the council initiated a text amendment for 50% when it went to begin through the process. Having a problem with the thing here. Won't move. Nothing is moving. Okay, so then the Planning Commission, at their hearing on April 16th of 2019, recommended 75% commercial for this ordinance that was processed at the time. The ordinance was then adopted by council in July of 2019, and it did not include a percentage when it was adopted. So the ordinance that was adopted and included a minimum of 2 building types in the NX neighborhood mixed use and CX zoning districts. It removed the townhouse building type from the CH zoning classification. It changed the permitted to a conditional in the CX district for townhouse and 2-family. And it removed the townhouse as a permitted use in the CH zoning classification and changed townhouse from a permitted to a conditional in the CX or in the DX, the downtown mixed use zoning classification. That's the history on this. So when it was brought back forward, the council initiated this text amendment to go through the process with the 50%. Planning Commission recommended approval of this text amendment at their May 5th meeting. However, they did change language. They wanted it to say that the CX commercial district shall require 75% of the square footage of a development to be commercial or retail. Do you have any questions for staff?
Does council have any questions? Do we have any comments from the public?
No, we do not.
Back to council. Questions, concerns, comments? Councilmember Judy.
So I have been consistently against the percentage because of data And what do, where does this actually exist? And what does the market hold? And give me some examples. And I know that a lot of people point to Avalon and Alpharetta. Well, the reason that's over 50% is because it has a 12-story hotel there. And that actually makes that work there. At this point in time, where we are as a city, I could support 50% right now, heading into the comp plan, the strategic plan, and diagnostic review of the UDC heading into next year. And coming out of that, reviewing if 50% is the right percentage. But I think 50% at this point in time would make sure that we're in a situation where we don't have anything that comes through that is objectionable at this point, has the correct or has the amount of mixed use that we've been hearing about, and allows us to then dive deeper into this. Again, I think that the UDC needs a deeper dive all around rather than Band-Aids, but I would be willing to support this Band-Aid at 50%. I think 75% basically makes it impossible for anything to be developed without a 12-story hotel or a big hotel involved. I've yet to have anybody point to me and show me what a 75% mixed use in this is now in this economic time, what that looks like. And I'm afraid if we go down that route, we could continue to see empty places. I think 50% is a fair compromise here until we can dig into those comp plans and strategic plans and the deep dive, and either redo the UDC as a whole or figure out what the correct percentage is. And if it's higher, it's higher. I just haven't seen the data on that yet to make that decision. So that's my position.
Thank you, Councilmember Judy. Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. What I'm struggling a bit with is that I see a fundamental difference in a mixed-use project that might be on, say, 1 to 3 acres of property versus one that's on more than that. And as I stated in item number 9, when you layer on all of our other requirements, that difference becomes fairly significant. And if you were to have somebody just draw some of those for you, I think what you'd see is that there is a significant difference in lot size. And perhaps what should happen with these is they'd be bifurcated, where there's rules for smaller size 1 to 3 development versus a larger area, which might give you the opportunity to build the hotel or to build whatever kind of thing that falls into the size into that size of property. So again, I just see 2 completely different potential here, and that's what I'm struggling with at this time. 75%, 50%, either one of those may be appropriate depending on the size of the property we're talking about.
Councilmember Hall.
Yes, I do want to say that I support 75%. And the reason for that is this is commercial mixed use. These are properties that are going to be in our commercial areas. I've had the opportunity to informally speak to city planners in other cities to try and identify how they arrive at the types of buildings and the kinds of development they want in their cities. And this is how they do it. They set these requirements and basically say, this is what we want to see, and this is what ends up getting built. So we need to set the requirements of what we want our city to look like, especially in these commercial areas where it's so important that we get this space. So I just wanted to add that.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, I think this amendment will bring consistency to the title of this zoning category. I want to remind you that the category we're discussing is the commercial mixed use, CX, which mainly has to be commercial. If any project wants to make it mainly residential, then they can apply to change the zoning to the residential mixed use. But to bring consistency to the title, I support 75%, which is mainly commercial. Also, I will support language related to the variance process. So if any project wants to bring it in front of mayor and council and through the public process and make sense, then can always move forward. So just to be consistency with the mainly commercial, I think that 75% honor this the title of this zoning. Anything less, especially 50% or less, then definitely need to be residential mixed use, and we can talk about rezoning any property that is CX that someone wants to bring mainly residential.
Councilmember Judy.
Again, hopefully between now and the second reading, I sent an email on 6/10 asking for us to work through this one exactly. And I received an email back from Councilman Palermo and have spoken to Councilman Wilsey and Kaiser on this. But I still, without a hotel like at Avalon, I would like for somebody to show me where 75% mixed use works and has been done without a large hotel more than 5 stories. And if that's the case, and there are areas that are doing that, then hey, let's show that and let's see what's done. But that's data and examples, and I haven't seen it yet. So what I in turn see is us having empty storefronts or empty parking lots or empty places because there's no example of it being done. So in between now and next time, like I asked on the 10th in my email, let's try to figure this out and use real world examples and data rather than just throwing a 75% number out there, which has no examples that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Councilmember Judy. Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I completely agree that we need a community vision and we need a plan. We also need data about what's going to work where. And again, I think we have the comp plan and the strategic plan coming up to take a closer look at that. An interesting statistics from the strategic plan, 45% of the people who responded said they believe that Roswell is a good place for investment and redevelopment, and I think we need to present a plan forward that will encourage that and will attract that, and will also, again, attract the kind of development that we want. Again, I would love to talk with Council Members Zapata and Councilmember Palermo and Hall about actually what they visualize and what they see, rather than just having a percentage and where that might look like, where it might look like and where it might work. I do think it's different all across the city. 75% might work in the Northwest and the Southeast quadrants, but I think there are other places where it doesn't make sense to require that. I wanted to mention a couple of examples. By my calculations, at the Fuqua Sun Valley project that was approved in 2017, comparing the commercial to residential square footage, that ended up being about 27% square footage. And if you can see right now, the residential has been built, the commercial has not. So, we don't know if that's going to work at that percentage yet. Hopefully it will when that's built, but we're in a very uncertain market. We don't know what's going to happen with retail or with office space or any other type of commercial. We also look at East Village that was approved in 2007. And if you look at that, the project, the retail project, it was 100% commercial. If you include the townhomes at East Village that were built a few years later, that was about 72% commercial. And even with 2 of the leading retailers in the country, that project wasn't successful there. So again, I think we need data on what's going to work where. Mayor Henry, you said that we need a Band-Aid. So if 50% is that Band-Aid until we can get through the strategic and comprehensive plan, I would support that. But again, I don't think 75% is the right number unilaterally across the city. That's going to put us in a position for success in this new world.
Thank you, Councilmember Wilsey. Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. I have a question for staff, and then I have a comment. So, Ms. Dybel, Councilman Zapata mentioned the potential for a variance if a developer did want to request lower than 75%. How could that potentially work?
So currently, if this is adopted with 75%, and there's nothing else in it, if anybody came to staff with anything less than 75%, we could not accept it. We could not process the application. So the only way, if something like that would happen, if a development came in and had, say, 45% commercial, language related to a variance would have to be added to the text amendment to allow someone to even request that portion, and it would be part of the application. So since all multifamily applications are conditional use anyway, they come to council. So that would be a concurrent variance when it came through the process. However, as you know, variances do require hardship criteria, so they'd have to provide us criteria to meet the hardship in the code related to variances. That's the only way to do that.
Thank you. And who ultimately would decide on that concurrent variance, and who ultimately would judge if there is a justified hardship and the request is justified or not?
As it would be a concurrent variance with the conditional use application, that would be the mayor and council to make that decision.
So thank you, Ms. Dybel. So this has definitely been a long discussion that we've had. So it dated back, as was shown, I think it was early 2019. We literally discussed this 8 times in committee to no avail to come up with to pass a percentage. Two times Planning Commission voted. Both times they looked at a recommendation of 50%, and both times they voted 75%. What I think is most important to me is the fact that, first of all, I really like Councilman Zapata's idea of potentially a variance. There's always that opportunity. Maybe it is a phenomenal development at 50% or at 25%, in which case the developer has the right to ask for that concurrent variance. The public has the opportunity to weigh in, understand that it's an exception, but they can certainly weigh in, and this council can certainly weigh in. So if I'm understanding correctly, even if we pass 75% tonight, that's not saying the only thing that can ever happen in the future for CX is 75%. But what it is doing is showing an intention. And I think it is important that we set the bar high and we show the right intention, because frankly, no matter what the lot size, I feel the public is pretty clear. They don't want to just see these majority apartment building type developments, whether we're talking about 1.4 acres in our historic district with about 140 apartments approved in the last year or so, or we're talking about Target, which was somewhere between 25 and 35 acres with about 350 apartments, I believe, approved without vertical integration, without walkability. I think we owe it to the public that we're focused on creating a code that is based on what they want, and it has to be something that's flexible, that shows opportunity, etc. But this concurrent variance, I think, does that. And at the end of the day, we do have to show that our expectations are real, they're serious, and given the mixed use discussion of what have we seen, we actually all of us except for Councilmember Hall witnessed closely and saw watched the whole process of Southern Skillet, which is about that slightly above 4.5 acres, where there was one proposal with 128 apartments and about 8 townhomes. There was another proposal with 0 residential. It would have just been a smaller development. They certainly suggested and were willing to to make it bigger, to add office, to add additional things. But nonetheless, there are developers that can develop 100% commercial. And what we're here suggesting is, hey, 100% commercial is above 75, but we're being flexible. We're showing, we're gonna have 75% be that target. And certainly, if a developer comes with an incredible opportunity where 75% is a hardship and they can really make something that's great for the community, then I'll certainly be looking forward to that opportunity to weigh in. So with that, if the motion includes an update to include language on a concurrent variance being available, then I'll certainly support 75%.
Additional comments from council? Councilmember Zapata.
So, I will suggest staff to help to work on the language related to the concurrent variance process. And I think that, how I see is any project that can with more than 51% and up to 74%, commercial, then they can apply for the concurrent variance and go through the process. And if it makes sense for the public and the elected representatives, then this project move forward and get approved. So I think that less than 50%, why don't just go to rezoning and get a residential mixed use then? If it's commercial mixed use, have to be more than 51%. So that is, just common sense, pure logic. So you have two options. If you have less than 50% commercial, just rezone to residential mixed use. So that is get things in order, get things like they should be, get clear for everybody to understand what a commercial or residential mixed use means. So I think that is a huge, what we're talking today is a big improvement to the UDC. Some of you might call it a bandage. I call it an improvement to the UDC. And even if you think about bandage, for small cats, they help. They cut the blood and they prevent infection on a small cat. So even bandage is a good solution for small cats. So I think this is a huge improvement, and I will support this. And I would like to work between the first and second reading for the variance process.
Councilmember Judy.
Again, so make it 5149 if that 2% makes it majority commercial. I can go for that. What I can't go for is something that nobody in this conversation has been able to show me an example of. We're making a rule where there's not an example of something. And we're saying, let's do a concurrent variance. Well, nobody that's going to develop anything in Roswell is going to come before this council to try to make a project knowing what's happened over the past 3 to 4 years of absolutely saying no to everything. So, we're talking about apartments, and we're talking about, the majority of these apartments that keep coming up. The only apartments that have been built were actually proposed by Councilman Palermo up there at the Fuqua. Those are the only ones that have been built. We keep talking about over the last 2.5 years. Those are garden style apartments up there on that are probably not going to have anything commercial built there. So what we're looking at here is trying to figure out what does it look like for us moving forward until we can dive deep into the data. And the data needs to be something that's realistic and has been done versus something that A, won't fit our code because we're not allowing 12-story hotels around the city, and B, not saying, hey, look, no, let's just throw this in there and let people come and beg. Because that's not good business. And what we need to do is make sure we don't have empty spots in places. We create a minimum number and we say, all right, let's go. Let's recruit this. But what we're doing here is we're throwing a number out there at 75% that there's no examples of. And I've been asking for examples this whole time, back to the discussion from last year. And it's very easy if we can get some examples moving forward so we can actually put something in that's good for everybody. And, I wish this conversation would go a different way rather than trying to bring up old stuff and say, well, this is what these people are doing. This is what these people are doing. No, what we're trying to do is now. What are we trying to do moving forward? What we're trying to do is 5149, great. Let's just go. Let's continue, quit playing with the 75 number that has not been proved.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. You all have made some very good arguments tonight. I came in tonight thinking I knew what my thoughts were on the matter. I will likely tonight reserve my vote to see what actually gets proposed. If there's a reasonable way that you go from 51 or 49 to 75 or however that works, that also may get to my concerns about property size, about location, those sorts of things. But everyone's made some good arguments tonight, and I'll be very eager to see what that language looks like, just to make sure that it's inviting language, that it says, if you have a great proposal, bring it forward. I'm not sure how you create that language, but that's what I would expect to see based on what you all have said tonight. So I appreciate the discussions. But I think it's very important that we see that language prior to enacting this into an ordinance.
Thank you, Councilmember Tizer. Councilmember Palermo.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor Henry. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing the language as well. I'm certainly very flexible to the language. What's important to me is just the intent. It's important to me that our community knows and the developers know that we're looking, if it's commercial mixed use, which is not all properties, but if it's a commercial mixed use property, we're looking for it to be 75% commercial/retail. And agreed with the right language, just showing there's absolutely that opportunity to apply with a lower percentage, and council will certainly weigh in. The public will certainly have a transparent process. And at the end of the day, it is important to note that even in the last few years, we've seen properties, a CX approved with 4% residential. That's the real thing. What we're talking about is we all hope there'll be these incredible ones, and we don't want to do anything to hurt this incredible magical development that might come. But we've seen the actual developments that have been approved, and they've not been something that the residents have been saying betters the community. And that's why I'm excited for this to address that. And again, we've seen one with above 75%. And the one we saw with above 75% as an example is Skillet property. So the Skillet property, we got to see, the public got to see as well, a proposal with 100% commercial versus one with, I believe, 25% commercial. I forget the exact number, but nonetheless, there certainly are commercial developments that occur, and I think this is a great opportunity to really show residents we're listening to them, and we're fighting for really the Roswell of the future that we want to see.
Additional, yes, Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think one thing that we can all agree on is that we want mixed-use projects that are successful and that benefit our residents, and that increase our commercial tax base. I think we have to come up with a number that is going to be attractive to those who want to invest in our city. However, I've spoken to a number of real estate folks in a lot of different areas. And, they say that if we make it too restrictive, they're just going on to the next city. So again, I think it's important that we find a number, we come back with a proposal that works and is attractive to both our citizens and to investors. Mike, I would love it if you could show me a project that you think is good, whether it's somewhere in Atlanta or an image of anywhere in the country, and where it might work and what the percentages are and how they've made it work.
Additional comments from council? I will entertain a motion.
Thank you, Mayor. So my motion will include a couple of one change and one addition. So I will motion to approve item number 10 with between the first and the second reading, adding language related to the concurrent variance process. And again, I will suggest if staff need a certain percentage or a certain range, I would say between 51 and 74%, they can come and require a concurrent variance and go through the public process. Number one, and number two, with 75% minimum commercial.
We've got a motion by Councilmember Zapata. Does staff have any questions about that motion?
No, we're good.
Do I have a second?
Second.
By Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it's Zapata, Hall, and Palermo. All those opposed? It is Councilmember Judy and Councilmember Hall. Do you have a different preference here, or are you opposed?
We'll see.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're opposed. Councilmember Tyser.
I'm going to withhold my vote, abstain until I see the language, and then I might be able to be supportive. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion carries. Thank you. And we're going to take a 15-minute break right now. And we will see you back here at 9:15. like to go ahead and call the meeting back to order. And Councilmember Zapata, we are back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 11 of today's agenda, approval of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, Section 13.4.3, who can submit an application, letter E, regarding multifamily requirements. First reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Article 13, Section 13.4.3. Who can submit an application regarding multifamily requirements? Now therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, hereby amend Article 13, Section 13.4.3. Who can submit an application of the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and have approved this as the first reading.
Ms. Dybel.
Okay, let's get this going here. Okay, so section 13.4.3, who can submit an application? We're looking to create creation of letter E regarding multifamily requirements. So what this would be doing would be creating that state that multifamily shall be allowed as a conditional use in the following locations within the city of Roswell. Number one, on a parcel of property which borders State Highway 9 or Georgia 140 east of Highway 9, or also on Highway 92. On property where multifamily development exists today or has had an approved plan as of January 1st, 2020. If neither of the above locations apply, multifamily would be allowed as a conditional use within the historic district at no more than 8 units per acre, or outside the district as a conditional use within a mixed-use development where the square footage of non-residential uses is greater than 75%. So some history on this. Prior to the UDC, the Roswell ordinance included density as follows. In the historic district under the HR zoning, it allowed 8 units to the acre. In Parkway Village, condos and townhomes were allowed as 6 units per acre. In the rest of the city, within the zoning classifications that allowed multifamily, you had 5 units to the acre. And the density of 5 units to the acre was changed from 8 around 2002. So prior to 2001, the following zoning classifications existed in the code, allowing for specific densities. Under RTH, which was a townhome classification, that was 8 units to the acre. R3, which was multifamily, 8 units. R4, also multifamily, was 14 units per acre. R4A, 10 units per acre. R5 was 8 units to the acre. So in 2001, an ordinance was approved which did not allow any person to request rezoning to R4 and R4A zoning classifications. So what this is looking to do, and the text amendment was placed in this section, since it indicates who can submit for a rezoning, who can initiate a text amendment, and which zoning classifications cannot have an application filed for rezoning. So this text amendment will restrict the location where an application for mixed-use rezoning can actually be submitted. Planning Commission recommended denial of this text amendment. Do you have any questions for staff?
Does council have any questions? Do we have any comments from the public?
No, we do not.
Back to council. Questions, comments, concerns? Wow, everybody got quiet. Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Ms. Dybel, question for you. Shouldn't that be, who can apply and where be determined by the zoning category itself? I mean, I guess I'm not quite sure what the intention of this amendment is.
So the intention, from what I can understand of this text amendment, is when you say who can submit an application, what you're looking to do is to state, if you're going to submit an application, where can you submit it? So when I gave the history, kind of helped with that, because when that was done, it basically indicated that some classifications and zoning classifications, you couldn't even request or it was limited to a specific area. So what they're looking to do is putting this in this section to state, okay, if you're going to request an application for multifamily, it has to be in one of these areas, or if it's not, then it has to meet these criteria of 8 units to the acre, or the greater than 75% if it's going to be within a mixed-use development. So if someone, say, comes in with an application, when we look at it, we can say, all right, where are you located? So if they're located on, let's just say, Highway 9, and they said, okay, so you're on Highway 9, so then you can, and you're zoned CX, and you meet the other requirements that are specified in that classification, they'd be able to bring an application in. If, let's say, somebody is zoned DX, so they're in the historic district and they have multifamily, their conditional use would have to come through of showing 8 units to the acre. So that's basically what this text amendment is doing, to indicate where can you apply and then placing a density on it in certain locations. Does that help?
It does, but it seems to me like that should already be built into the allowable building types within that zoning code. So it seems that we might want to look at that first or instead of this text amendment. Just an observation.
Additional questions, comments from council? Wow, we should take 15-minute breaks more often. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. Motion to approve item 11.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Hall. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it's Hall, Zapata, and Palermo. All those opposed is Judy, Wilsey, and Tizer. I will break the tie in favor of the motion. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So item number 12, approval of the text amendment to Unified Development Code, UDC Article 11, Section 11.4, Streets, 11.4.1, Intent, letter F, subsection 3, for properties that contain multifamily units to require 8-foot multi-use trails. This is the first reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Article 11, Section 11.4.1, intent. Now therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend Section 11.4.1, intent of the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and approve. This will be the first reading.
Comments, questions from council? Do we have any public comments?
No, we do not.
Bringing it back to council. Comments, questions? Yes, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So, I would like to clarify about the being along all the streets surrounding the property. So I would like to add some language there that is very clear that we're talking about along all streets surrounding the property. So if it's a corner or it's three different streets, then include all of them.
Additional comments, questions from council? Councilmember Judy.
Ms. Dybel, is that how it was explained to Planning Commission? I can't remember right now.
Hold on a second and let me share my screen so I can show you what the Planning Commission stated. So the Planning Commission heard this item and the recommended approval with a change. that the state's an 8-foot multi-use trail shall be required along the front of the development for all developments that contain multi-family units. So what Councilmember Zapata indicated is he was probably looking to state along all street frontage of the development that contain this. So before we go back to that though, I spoke with transportation earlier, and you guys did approve a text amendment 2 weeks ago on the 8th when they added language to this section related to their multi-use pass as recommended by the Roswell Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. And they used the reference of the figure in 11.4.14D with a 10-foot path as a default, and to allow staff to narrow it to 8 feet with adequate justification. I just want to make that clear. Right now, the text amendment is for 8 feet, but transportation's was to 10 feet. So they used that diagram in the UDC. Just so you understand, might be a little bit of a difference between this one and the one adopted 2 weeks ago.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So first off, I am comfortable and supportive of our transportation department's recommendation and request that instead of saying 8 foot, we say multi-use trails. So I'm certainly supportive of that. And also do feel it is certainly important that it is the full exterior of the parcel. So with recent examples being whether it's Sun Valley, it's not just Highway 9, but would be Sun Valley as well. If it's Hill Street, with Hill Street, it would not just be Highway 9, but it would be Hill Street as well. So I think it is important that we are really fully connecting those, any corners, et cetera, really any streets bordering one of our highest density properties.
Additional comments from council? Do we have any comments from the public? Did I ask you that? Yes, you did. We still don't have any. Would anyone like to speak? Or if not, I'll entertain a motion.
Actually,
yes, Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, Mayor, thank you, Mayor. I do have a quick question for Ms. Dybel. We do have elsewhere in the code where on almost any street a sidewalk would be required, correct?
Yes,
this
that's
is
correct.
Just changing the side?
Yes, that is correct. It's just changing the width of the sidewalk.
It would just change it from 5 to a mandatory 8, regardless of where it was.
Correct.
Correct.
Councilmember
on the size of the parcel, I think one of my biggest concerns is if it was a smaller development and suddenly, you're bringing in a 8-foot sidewalk all the way around, that's a lot different than if it's a 35-acre parcel. Just something to think about as this moves forward.
Councilmember Judy.
So I'm a little bit confused on this. So Councilmember Palermo just said 10 foot, because we just read the 10 foot. Is the 10 foot only on the street side? And I'm confused to that. And also, if we've got, the way I understood it from listening to the Planning Commission is what they agreed upon was they wanted to make sure the 8 foot was in the front. There would obviously be 5 foot on the sides, but their approval of this was the 8 foot on the front. Is that correct, Ms. Dybel?
So let me go back to my screen here. So theirs was to say it was for along the front of the development for all developments that contain multifamily. However, if there's a corner lot, there'd be 2 streets. So that's where the change of language would come to say street frontage. But the Planning Commission did just say along the front of the development.
My concern here is not that this is a is if you've got 5 foot sidewalks on the side on a probably arterial street, not a main street, because you're going to put the front on a main street usually, and then you start putting 8 foot on the side that's probably never going to connect. A, I think it'll look out of place. B, it's probably going to take away what you can do on the sides of the buildings cosmetically, because you're taking away building space when you start doing this, and you don't want to cloak doing this because you're trying to take away buildable space versus walkability. So, I would support the 8 foot out front, like Planning Commission said, but I think when you start putting 8 foot all around it on all these sides, unless they're main streets, you start getting into, and to Ms. Wilsey's point, if it was a 35 acre property, then maybe that's a different story. If it's a 4 acre property or a 1 acre property, I think you get in trouble. So that's where I'm having issues here.
And let me ask a question, because I can think of at least one apartment complex at the top of my head that's on 2 major roads. And each major road has an entrance. So what's the front of that complex? Is it, I don't know what the front is. And what I'm thinking about is, I forget what it's called now, but it's the old Tahoe apartments. And they've got a main entrance on Holcomb Bridge, then they've got a main entrance on Warsaw. So what's the front? So that would be my question. How would staff determine what the front was?
Staff would look at that as how is the development being faced. Now, granted, if they face the buildings 2 different ways, but we also address the properties based on the front. So if you've got Alpharetta Highway and we'll say Sun Valley, since we had an apartment complex there, those are facing Alpharetta Highway. Though they do come down the side of Sun Valley, but they face them towards Alpharetta Highway. So we look at it that way. How do they direct the development? How do they face the buildings? Whether it's if there's multiple buildings, some of them may go a different direction, but they might all be addressed on, let's say, Alpharetta Highway. We take a look at it that way.
So you look at the address, because for example, the old Tahoe apartments, they're not facing Holcomb Bridge and they're not facing Warsaw either. So you would look at whatever the address is that they use for the complex.
We take a look at that. We look at kind of like the way they set the buildings and everything. So there are different factors that we look at based on what we consider the front.
Councilmember Claremont.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So with that, a couple comments. So first off, it was said that, if it's an arterial, there's nothing it would connect to, but in fact, it would be connecting to the main road. So there'd be a corner, and that would be one, continuous sidewalk that would be a multi-use trail. So that's helping with that connectivity surrounding the apartment building. Also, there was discussion on thinking that this makes sense for a large property, but concern around what if it's a small property for the apartment building. And I think Hill Street is actually another great example here. So Hill Street on 1.4 acres is the densest apartment building in the history of Roswell. And even still, they ended up actually going for wider sidewalks than required. So they were required to have an 8 foot sidewalk on Highway 9. And if I remember correctly, they went for somewhere between 10 and 14 feet. So there's definitely the space. It's just bottom line is this is putting that minimum requirement in of that multi-use trail. And again, certainly not suggesting or supportive that through the property that it would have multi-use trails, but I think it's quite reasonable and really beneficial to those future residents that are going to live in those apartments to be surrounded by a multi-use trail on all exteriors of the parcel.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Ms. Title, is it possible, and I believe this is so, that additional sidewalks can be required as a conditional use, especially since we're going to be looking at them on a project by project, parcel by parcel basis, that they could be added, on other sides and other streets involved?
Yes, so all multifamily is conditional use in the code and we must come through the process. And yes, it can be a condition of the approval to widen the sidewalk at that point in time by council.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So quick question, this language will allow more than 8-foot multi-use trails, or they have to be 8-foot, or we need to add a minimum of 8-foot in case like a project we like to have 10, 15, 14 foot. This language will allow that, or we need to add a minimum of 8-foot multi-use trails? Question for staff.
This language currently would be a minimum of 8 feet if it's approved as indicated. We can reword it if it needs to be worded to show it that way between now and the second reading, but the language is for a minimum of 8 feet.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Now, Ms. Dybel, did you say that RDOT, so our Department of Transportation, their preference, did I understand correctly, their preference is we don't mention 8 feet and instead just say multi-use trail, given the fact that this council has defined a multi-use trail?
So let me share my screen again to give you a little bit of an example. Here we go. Okay, so what transportation indicated, as stated, this was adopted on June 8th. So let me see if I put in here. Okay, so what they did with the text amendment that was adopted 2 weeks ago is they attached it basically to this multi-use trail. So if you take a look at the paved area, letter B, the minimum is 8 feet, the adequate is 10, the desirable is 12. So based on the text amendment that was approved after speaking with transportation, they indicated that they referenced the figure, which is the one I just showed you, 11.4.14D, with a 10-foot path as a default, and to allow staff to narrow to 8 feet with adequate justification by an applicant. That is what RDOT indicated to me this morning that was adopted by Mayor and Council on June 8th of this year.
And so with that, thank you for that clarification, Ms. Dybel. So again, I'd certainly be supportive of staff's recommendation there, and certainly would trust staff with that portion of the process.
Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. I also would be supportive of having that language as adopted, as we adopted a couple weeks ago. It's recommended by the Transportation RDOT, but also am supportive of being sure that we include all sides of the building, given that our community has made it very, very clear how important sidewalks are and the walkability of the community. So I think it would just be an injustice to exclude any sides of the building.
Additional comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to clarify, like, seems like the minimum for the multi-use trails is 8 foot. Is any multi-use trails less than 8 foot? So, well, if you just say the minimum of 8 foot, then it's a multi-use trails, and then you can, if it's needed, can go to 14 or whatever is required or needed.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. I think the advantage, though, of following staff's recommendation on this is it gives them the opportunity that instead of just the minimum of 8, staff's gonna work with the developer and see what's appropriate and realistic. And at times that might be 10 feet. That could theoretically be 12 feet, but it's letting staff kind of weigh in and have that process versus I believe if we just pass just 8 feet, staff's never going to have that opportunity to find there's a good fit of the 10 feet. So that's why I think there's the advantage of using staff's recommended language.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, if you use the minimum of 8 foot, this means that can go to 10, 12, 14, so minimum of. No, just 8 foot, like seems to be right now, say 8 foot. So minimum of 8 foot.
Councilmember Palermo.
So with that, yes, I certainly agree that the minimum of gives the developer the opportunity to choose to do a larger sidewalk, just like they had done at Vickers by choice. They had done at Hill Street by choice. But what it doesn't, but by us passing the language as minimum 8 feet, it means staff doesn't have the opportunity to weigh in officially. They can't say, no, it needs to be 10 feet. They can only say 8 feet. So by us saying multi-use trail, it's going to accomplish the goal of ensuring it's no less than 8 feet. And it's going to give staff the opportunity to give their guidance and insight on it.
Councilmember Hall.
I just wanted to comment that it would, if we use the other language, the language would be consistent in both places. And that might just bring some more clarity on this subject.
Additional comments from council? Do I have a motion? Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Motion to approve item number 12 with the language recommended by staff for the multi-use trails, and also language that will make it clear along all the streets surrounding the property.
We've got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it is Hall, Palermo, Zapata, Wilsey, and Judy. All those opposed? Councilmember Tizer, you're opposed? You're muted, but are you opposed?
No, he is not. He dozed off for just a second. I'll join the group.
Okay, it passes unanimously. Thank you.
So, number 13, approval of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Article 4, Section 4.5.2, use table, and Article 6, Section 6.5.2, use table, for convenience stores with gas pumps used to be a conditional use request in commercial and industrial zoning classifications. This is the first reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Articles 4 and 6, Sections 4.5.2, use table, and 6.5.2, use table regarding convenience stores for gas pumps. Now, therefore, the Mayor and Council of the City of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, to hereby amend Articles 4 and 6, Sections 4.5.2, use table, and 6.5.2, use table, the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and to approve this is the first reading.
Ms. Stiebel.
So this is a text amendment to Article 4, as heard, Sections 4.5.2, use table, and Article 6, Section 6.5.2, the use table, regarding the convenience store with gas pumps. A little background on this item is basically the request for a rezoning came through last fall related to a gas station up on Alpharetta Highway at Hembry Road, 2 different parcels. So this is a little bit of the background as to this text amendment that's going through the process. So this text amendment is to replace the L, which is limited, to a C as a conditional use for a convenience store with gas pumps within the CX, the commercial mixed use, CC, commercial corridor, PB, Parkway Village, and the CH, commercial heavy zoning classifications within the city. And ours also in Article 6 to replace the L, which is limited, to a C for conditional use for the convenience store with gas pumps in the IX industrial flex zoning classification within the city. The Planning Commission at their hearing on May 5th recommended denial of this application. This is the current use chart that's in Article 4. The very bottom line, you can see convenience store with gas pumps is a limited use in the CX, CC, PV, and CH. This is the use table from Article 6. Once again, the very bottom line is convenience store with gas pumps. As you can see, it's a limited use currently in the IX zoning classification. And as I stated before, the Planning Commission did recommend denial of this text amendment. Do you have any questions for staff?
Council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So I certainly support anything that's going to make sure that higher intensity uses go through a public process, and just making sure that we are targeting and being strategic in the city of Roswell. My question for staff is, by changing this from limited to conditional, are there any requirements connected with that limited that we would be losing by moving to conditional? And if the answer is yes, then depending on what those are, how could we make sure those are still a requirement if this does become conditional?
Give me 1 second. So under the code, limited uses are looked at in Article 9. So when it's listed as limited use, let's say the convenience store with fuel pumps has the limitations, has the following limitations. A use must be with, let's see. Okay, when it's subject to limited, it must be attached to a multi-tenant building, cannot be located as standalone. The floor area cannot exceed, oh, wait, sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. Okay, sorry, here we go. That was without fuel pumps. This one's with fuel pumps. Okay, it's limited use. All fuel pumps must be located at least 25 feet from any public right-of-way or lot line. And all buildings and appurtenances must be located at least 100 feet from all lot lines abutting a residential use. A type A or B buffer must be established along all lot lines abutting a residential use. And all fuel must be stored underground outside of any public right-of-way. So when it's subject to a limit, if it's required as a limited use, it's subject to those classifications. Where it's a conditional use, its permit is subject to section 13.4 and the standards I just read. So if it's made a conditional use, those 3 standards are still apply. Okay.
Thank you.
Additional, yes, Councilmember Judy.
Ms. Dybel, have we looked, so I think it's really important that people listen to the Planning Commission on these 3 items coming up. They were all 3 were unanimously denied for lack of information on them and why and what's going on. And so my question to you is instead of brushing with a broad stroke across all our commercial areas where things such as gas stations, car washes, and storage units are appropriate, have we looked at where they would impact residential areas? We did receive a letter today where a car wash resident said the car wash was impacting a residential area, was near there. Rather than creating a broad stroke of taking this out, and that's the reason you have a code, and if we got to go back to the UDC and make sure we're looking at making things clear, then that's what we need to do, but rather than this broad stroke. But if we look at where this might impact a residential area in a certain distance from where these things could be done, rather than this, I don't know, all-encompassing addition, might be where we need to go. And I just was wondering if we've done that yet with this.
The staff did not take a look at all the different locations that we have all the different car washes and convenience stores and everything in. because they're located in commercial zoning classifications or industrial zoning classifications. So if they are in a commercial zoning classification and they abut a residential property, then they're required to meet the standards that apply. None of the items that we have that can't have come through actually abut a residential property. They might have another commercial property that's in between them and then another, and then residential. But we did not look at the question that you asked for as to whether or not they actually abut residential and what could we do about how they buffer them and everything else.
So I understand the concern between this. I probably will not support these tonight, but between this reading and next, I would like to take a dive into where this might be appropriate to put a distance rather than brush with this broad stroke. And I think if you listen to the unanimous disapproval of this from Planning Commission, you'll understand a little bit of why I'm saying that. Thank you.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So I mean, I would say in listening to the audio, they definitely did also, or some of the members really mentioning just being very tired as well. It was a very late night, and I can certainly understand that. But I think more importantly, no one on this council, not one of us, votes with Planning Commission's recommendation every time. So each one of us have voted with some of the recommendations. Each one of us have voted against some of the recommendations. So I think we do have to make sure we're all just doing what we think is best. But that being said, there are some aspects that was just said that I actually agree with completely, perhaps in a different way. I'm very risk averse, so I certainly support this tonight. I will be supporting this tonight and want to see this turn into a conditional use to ensure that we're not going to have something go in the wrong place. But if Councilmember Judy would be interested, something to consider, I'd love to sit down and have the two of us maybe even just look at a map and try to come back and work together to see where are some areas where it should not be conditional use. And I think that would be an important exercise, but I want to make sure we're doing it that way. Instead of just saying, all right, here's the places we definitely don't want it. Let's instead look at where are the places where it is appropriate. And then because there's going to be some gray area places, for those gray area places, I actually do think conditional use is the best way. But again, the offer's out there if anybody would like to sit down. And that offer is the same for this one with gas stations, also the same with storage facilities, also the same with car washes. I'd love to sit down with anybody on this council and anybody with the public and see where are the best places or right places for it. But I can't risk having this not be conditional between now and then.
Let me, if I might interject, I've got just a general comment about gas pumps as well as self-storage and the car wash. I have never in my career on council here or as mayor had anyone come forward and tell me that we need more gas stations, more car washes, or more self-storages. You can easily access any three of those no matter what part of Roswell you're in. No one is in danger of running out of gas or driving a dirty car because they're all within basically minutes of every one of our homes. So I support all three of them being a conditional use, and I think that that's something we could still allow if need be. But right now, I'm not seeing the need, and like I said, nobody's asking me to build gas stations, car washes, or storage facilities. Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. So yeah, for me here, the main point is for this intense use to go through a public process. I'm not afraid of going through a public process where you have to, neighborhood meetings, get the input from the neighbors, get planning commission, get mayor and council involved. I don't know what is the problem here, and if anybody's missing the point here, that is to make it a public process. Very simple. If anybody believes here that shouldn't be any public process for any of those three usage, then, well, the option is there. You can always vote against the public process for this intense use. So that is the point. It's not more, it's not less. We can go look, make maps and maps and maps and more maps. But then the very simple. The point here is that this has to go through a public process. And we all know what the public process means and all the steps that they have to follow a public process. So it's just very simple.
Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you, Mayor. Unfortunately, I don't believe it's quite that simple. I voted against the zoning change that involved the gas station. And I voted against it because the zoning told us, and the public process that created the zoning told us that it shouldn't happen. The law and the courts of our state and country put a guardrail around zoning decisions to outlaw decisions that can be arbitrary and capricious. While I may be against or for or against car washes and gas pumps, the more decisions that we move to council conditional without rules and guidelines, the more we risk putting our city in legal jeopardy when we don't have evaluation criteria to approve or disapprove. I like the concept that I heard from Councilmember Palermo and Councilmember Judy, that we set criteria for these things and then just obey the criteria. So whether that's don't build a car wash within 1,000 feet of whatever, that would be fine. We know what that means. We can take out a tape measure and we can get there. I understand there's some gray areas. That's fine. I'm not opposed to being conditional on some gray areas, but the more that we can set guidelines and evaluative criteria, I think the better that we will be. I think our zoning, which is a public process that we go through every several years, is a public process with lots of public input. So to say that there's no public process, I think is incorrect. But I'm just concerned that as we make too many things conditional, we get ourselves into a bad place. I think these two, at least two of these, I may have a different opinion on the middle one, but at least two of these, I think these problems can be solved very easily by taking a look at where they can be put today and coming up with some firm rules and regulations as to why they should or shouldn't be in that area, or as Councilmember Palermo said, where they should be. And then we can encourage them to be there. So that's my concern, again, around too many things turning conditional without any rules, any guidelines. Thank you.
Councilmember Zapata.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I have to disagree because we have recently two examples, one for a car wash and the other one for the convenience store with the gas pump that didn't have to go through the public process. The public didn't even know until it was built. They haven't had the chance to weigh in, to comment, to see the needs of the community of this gas pump or car wash. So they didn't go through a process. So I disagree with council member here saying that they went through the process because they didn't go through the process. So they were just approved without going through the public process. So, and we have very fresh, very clear two examples, one on the east side on a car wash and the other one on Alpharetta Highway right next to the hospital for the gas pump. So, and both of them didn't have to go through the process. That is a problem. That is an issue. So what this will do is we'll make it go through the process with input from everybody, the community, the citizens, the taxpayers, the public, the mayor and council. And so that is what it's all about. So those examples did not go, for the record, did not go through the process, and they were built anyway.
Councilmember Wilsey.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is a question, I think, for Mr. Davidson, and just based on kind of what I'm hearing. My interpretation is that we are in a better position if we have the right guidelines and limitations around a project rather than having it come to council as a conditional use. Is that correct?
If you know the guidelines that you would prefer, then yes, that would definitely be preferable from a legal standpoint.
Correct, because we have to look at a conditional use based on certain guidelines, and if we are outside of those, then there's a risk that it would move ahead anyway. And so I do support making sure that we put some strict guidelines around it to make sure that we're putting these projects where they belong and where they make sense. So if we can do that between now and the next reading, I think we might that might be a good path forward.
Councilmember Tyser.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to remind everybody, we're talking about our commercial districts here, which are pretty well defined and have been through a very long, arduous public process. I'm about to go through another one. I think if you take a look at where those are, I think the guidelines and rules that we could set up to keep these kinds of things from occurring are pretty important. And I think that while this council has the will to do it, we ought to do it. We ought to set firm rules and guidelines so that if these things come up again, they won't happen in a bad way. And that's why just being conditional, I don't think is enough. And I'll make some comments about item 14 when we get there, because sometimes, a different council may do something completely different. But if we set solid rules and guidelines, I think we can stop the things that we don't like, the things that citizens don't like, from ever coming forward at all.
Councilmember Judy.
So the narrative that people are afraid of a public process just needs to stop. Nobody's afraid of a public process. We understand conditional use. There's better ways of doing things that you just heard could keep us out of legal legal jeopardy. B, protects from future councils with different opinions that might change things, and they would have to change the ordinance rather than just go through conditional use. And C, with us between this reading and next going to the drawing board, in fact, I will support these tonight in hopes that we will go to the drawing board and figure out where we do want this stuff and put in these guidelines, and in those gray areas make those conditional versus in the broad strokes. So I think this is one of those not all or nothing things. And if you want to characterize it as you're afraid of a public process rather than working on it between first and second reading, then I think we all lose in that situation. That's not where we need to be. So I will support this tonight in hopes that we can do that before second reading. And if we can do that, then I think the city wins versus trying to tell the other council members that they're afraid of a public process.
Additional comments from council? Did we have any public comment on this item?
No, we did not.
Do I have a motion? Yes, Councilmember Zapata.
Motion to approve item number 13.
Motion to approve. Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it is Judy, Wilsey, Zapata, Palermo, and Hall. All those opposed? Kaiser. Motion carries.
So, item 14. Approval of the text amendment to the Unified Development Code UDC to Article 4, Section 4.5.2, use table, and Article 6, Section 6.5.2, use table to have self-storage as conditional use in the commercial heavy TH, industrial flex IX, and industrial light IL zoning classifications. This is the first reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Articles 4 and 6, Sections 4.5.2, use table, 6.5.2, use table regarding self-storage. Now therefore, the mayor and council of the city of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend Articles 4 and 6, Section 4.5.2, use table, and 6.5.2, use table of the Unified Development Code, the text of which is incorporated herein by reference. And if approved, this would be the first reading.
Ms. Stagel.
So this is the text amendment to Articles 4 and 6 regarding self-storage as a conditional use to be located in the CX or CH, commercial heavy zoning, IX, industrial flex zoning, and IL, industrial light zoning classification, sections 4.5.2 and 6.5.2, the use tables. So it's a little background. Over the past 10 years, following self-storage facilities have been built. We have a new self-storage facility being constructed near City Hall that was replacing an old self-storage facility. We had a new self-storage facility on Old Alabama Road and Holcomb Woods Parkway. And we had the renovation of a self-storage facility at 1240 Alpharetta Street and a new self-storage facility located on Old Ellis Road. So this is a request to replace the L, the limited use, to a C, conditional use for all self-service storage use in the CH zoning classification, and to replace the L, which is limited to a conditional use for all self-service storage in the IX industrial flex and the IL industrial light zoning classifications of the city. Here is the classification, the use table in Article 4.5.2. As you can see, the bottom line, all self-service storage, it's a conditional use already in the SH, which is the shop front zoning classification. The property located at 1240 Alpharetta Street, when it went through its renovation, it came through the conditional use process, I want to say around 2015, and went through there, got an approval, and then they've made their renovations. It's currently a limited use in the CH as shown. It is also on the bottom line here, all self-service storage. It's a limited use in currently in the IX and the IL are two industrial zoning classifications. Planning Commission recommended denial of this text amendment. And before the question is asked, currently in the code, under our use standards for self-service storage as limited use, it has the criteria. However, it's different from the gas station one. So if you wanted to make this a conditional use, you would want to keep this criteria as well. Unlike the gas station where it said the criteria is the same, this one does not state that. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Kaiser.
Thanks, Mayor. This is an example of kind of what I was talking about before. If I had my choice, I would like to continue what we did a couple of years ago, where we outlawed these in the historic district, if I remember that correctly. I'd like to see us not have any more self-storage facilities. I think the couple that we found ourselves building are long-term mistakes. They're single-use buildings that can really never be turned into much else. A couple of them are in places where we could have enhanced our community. We could have created the kind of housing that people who have incomes that require them to live in different kinds of buildings than single-family homes could live. And we built storage facilities, so the only thing they can do there is put their stuff in it. So on this one, I don't think conditional is enough on this, and to the extent that we could narrow it down so that we just don't have any more, it would be, I think would be an interesting way to handle this. Don't know if we can outlaw them completely, but I certainly would like to make it very much limited. Thank you.
Councilmember Kaiser, before we go on with the discussion, Mr. Davidson, if you would weigh in, aren't we by law required to allow uses in certain areas?
Right. You'll need to continue to allow them, but you can limit where they're going to go.
I'm sorry, he cut out. Could you repeat that?
You have to allow them. However, you can, as a council, decide how to limit them where they are allowed.
So
Councilmember Tizer.
thank you. So for example, we could say that we only want them in industrial flex. Could we limit them to something like that? So we could narrow it down to a point where it was there, but wouldn't get in the way of the kinds of things that might enhance the community better.
Correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Dybel?
I'd like to clarify that. So what Councilmember Tizer stated, in our code, self-service storage was made a conditional use in the historic district. So it wasn't removed totally, but in 2018, it was indicated as a conditional use throughout the historic district. So if somebody ever came through, they could request that as a conditional use. Thank you.
Councilmember Palermo?
I'm not sure if this question is for Ms. Dybel or Mr. Davidson, but through this process, tonight's the first reading, and hypothetically, perhaps this as written, this motion passes tonight. Is there the ability in the second reading to decide that, yes, within these zoning classifications, they will change to conditional use? And in fact, in these zoning classifications or in these locations, they will move to not permitted. Is that something that can be done through these first and second readings, and especially second reading?
Yes. Yes, this is a text amendment regarding that subject, so you'd be fine outlawing them in some and then allowing them conditionally in other.
Excellent. Thank you for that, because my expectation is that I'll be in support of this motion tonight, and I will expect potentially this entire council staff, et cetera, having some different suggestions and hopefully working together on how to make it even more supportive of Roswell's long-term vision.
Councilmember Tizer?
Thanks. Councilmember Palermo, I would agree that I'll be supportive of this one tonight, but really would like to see us clean this one up a lot more.
Do we have any public comment?
No, we do not.
Additional comments from council? Yes, Councilmember Palermo?
And if I heard Ms. Dybel correctly, this one with the motion, would the motion have to include to keep all the rules within limited to ensure that what's passing tonight is both conditional and not deleting those limited rules?
That is correct. You would want to include the limitations that are stated in the section of the code in 9.6.4 in order to bring those forward.
Additional questions? Do we have a motion?
Yes. Motion to approve item number 14, first reading.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Is that clear to staff? Does he need to clarify that?
You should clarify it to indicate with the limitations in from Article 9. If he states that, we'll be fine.
Yes.
Do you choose to include that in your motion?
Yes.
We've got a motion by Councilmember Zapata. We've got a second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Councilmember Zapata.
All right. Item number 15. Approval of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, UDC, to Article 4, Section 4.5.2, Use Table, and Article 6, Section 6.5.2, Use Table, requiring a conditional use for car wash uses within the commercial and industrial zoning classification. This is the first reading. The first reading was deferred from the May 11, 2020 Mayor and Council meeting.
Mr. Davidson.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Code by modifying Articles 4 and 6, Sections 4.5.2 use table and 6.5.2 use table regarding car wash use. Now therefore, the mayor and council of the city of Roswell, Georgia, pursuant to their authority, do hereby amend Articles 4 and 6, Sections 4.5.2 use table and 6.5.2 use table of the Unified Development Code, text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this will be the first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Ms. Dybel.
So the text amendment is to Article 4 and 6. The use tables 4.5.2 and 6.5.2 related to the car wash use. Some background on this, and then we've had 2 new car wash businesses in the last few years that have been developed. One is located at 1564 Holcomb Bridge Road. The other one is 11560 Alpharetta Highway. So this is to replace the L for limited to a C conditional use for the car wash use in the CX commercial mixed use, the SH shop front mixed use, CC commercial corridor, and CH commercial heavy zoning classifications. And in Article 6 is to replace the L limited to a C conditional use for the car wash in the IX industrial flex and the IL industrial light zoning classifications. And as you can see at the bottom of the chart, a car wash is a conditional use currently in the NX neighborhood mixed use, and it's a limited use in CX, SH, CC, and CH classifications currently in the UDC. And it is a limited use in the IX and IL zoning classifications within the UDC. The Planning Commission did recommend denial of this. And as I stated in the last item, in Article 9 of the uses, car wash use defined and the use standards states where car wash is allowed as limited use is subject to the following. So if you choose to make this a conditional use, you would need to do what you did with the last item and subject the approval to the limitations from Article 9. Do you have any questions for staff?
Council have any questions, comments? Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Mayor Henry. Ms. Dybel, I'm sorry, can you please repeat all of the zoning classifications that would move from limited to conditional?
Yes, hold on one second. So the IX, industrial flex, and IL, industrial light zoning classifications, and the CX, commercial mixed use, SH, shop front mixed use, CC, commercial corridor, and CH, commercial heavy zoning classifications would all move from the limited to the C, conditional use, which would then require them to go through the process.
I appreciate that. Thank you for repeating that.
Additional questions, comments from council? Councilmember Tyser.
Thank you, Mayor. So here again, I believe the issues that our citizens are telling us about are in the C categories. Certainly shopfront seems like an inappropriate place for it to be. So perhaps the best way to handle this, rather than being conditional and risking a future council putting a car wash in a place we don't want it, perhaps we should change that instead of making it conditional. And that would be, I think would be my preference to give much firmer protection to people in our city.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. So yes, similar to the last discussion, I do feel in some or all of those C-type zonings that it actually should be not permitted. And then as for the employment district ones, those ones I certainly think conditional makes sense, but I'd want to look at it. Maybe one of those zoning types or both of those zoning types. It's worth exploring. So I will support this tonight, but I certainly see myself supporting certain locations moving to not permitted, and then certainly open to looking at should certain ones stay limited But again, I'd really have to learn a lot from staff and look closely at that map to form an opinion there.
Councilmember Judy.
I agree on this, same as I said on the first one. Working through this between now and then, and figuring out where we want these, where we don't want these, and where the gray area is, and making it conditional in the gray area is where I think we should end up as a council. So I'll support this tonight, and hopefully we can do some work between now and then and have more complete legislation.
Additional comments from council? Any comments from the public?
No comments from the public.
Yes, Ms. Dybel, you have something to add?
Yes, one thing I wanted to let everyone know is the second reading for all of these text amendments has been advertised and scheduled for Monday, July 13th. So I wanted to let you know when they'd be coming back before you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will also let you all know at this point in time that July 13th is going to be our first real live council meeting. So we can put Zoom behind us. Additional comments, questions from council? Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor Henry, motion to approve item 15, first reading.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Zapata. Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Palermo. No?
Sorry, I just need the clarification that it would include the limited details from item 9.
Yeah, approval with limitation, Article 9.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the city attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. All I have is a recommendation for closure to discuss personnel litigation and real.
Do I have a recommendation for closure?
Motion to approve.
By Councilmember Tizer. Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Judy. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimously. Now I understand that we will end this Zoom call. We'll start another one for closure.